The Cold War Explained, 1947 to 1991. After two devastating world wars in the first half of the 20th century, it seemed like all humanity wanted was peace. But no sooner had the Allies triumphed over fascism than they were locked into another bitter struggle for global supremacy. This time it wasn't Germany or Japan leading the charge against the US, UK, and USSR. Rather, this new conflict pitted two superpowers against each other with ideologies they hoped would save the world. And though there would be no massive battles between nuclear titans, the impact of the Cold War on the world would prove just as profound as any other war. In this video, we will look at what started the Cold War, how it affected the rest of the world, and why it ended after just over 4 decades. What started the Cold War? Well, it might not have been very cold. After fighting together to defeat the Axis powers, the US and USSR quickly grew tired of each other's company. Much like siblings who share a room, the relationship turned sour, although the reasons for the break are more complicated than that. Firstly, the two shared little ideological common ground. The democratic capitalism of the West was in stark contrast to the authoritarian communism of the Soviet Union. Both systems had proven popular amongst their own populations, but neither side could accept the other's way of organizing society. Secondly, both the US and USSR emerged from the Second World War as global superpowers. For the first time in history, two nations could threaten the existence of the other. Suddenly, every decision had to be weighed against how it would affect your superpower rival. And thirdly, the vast physical size of the two countries meant that the majority of their people lived far away from the front lines. As such, the leaders of both sides believed they had the time and resources to outlast the other. These three reasons alone explain much of the Cold War's duration. There were also numerous smaller crises which stoked tensions. After the war, Germany was divided into 4 occupation zones. When it came time to reunite the country, it became clear the French, British, American, and Soviets had different ideas about how to do so. The Western powers pushed for a democratic government, while the Soviets favored a communist one. In 1948, elections were held in the Western zones, resulting in a staunchly anti-communist government. In response, the Soviet blockade cut off all land and water access to the Western zones. Only a massive airlift by the Western powers prevented the people from being starved into submission, though the blockade failed. The division of Germany into Communist East and Democratic West would become a focal point of the Cold War. Another early flashpoint occurred in 1950 when North and South Korea were drawn into a civil war. Prior to this, Korea had been part of the Japanese Empire for several decades, and its future was uncertain. The US backed South Korea and the USSR backed North Korea. The war would last for 3 years and result in millions of casualties. It was among the bloodiest theaters of the Cold War. While neither side was able to claim a decisive victory, it did demonstrate the reach of Soviet influence and resulted in a lasting division of the peninsula. 1 year later, the Cold War would heat up dramatically, with the Korean War still raging. The US and USSR were at the brink of nuclear war. In October 1962, American spy planes photographed missile sites under construction in Cuba, only 90 miles off the coast of Florida. Fearing that this move would tilt the balance of power in the Western Hemisphere towards the communists, the US imposed a naval blockade on the island. For 13 tense days, the world watched as American and Soviet ships faced off in the Caribbean. At one point, a Soviet ship carrying missiles approached an American destroyer. A message was sent ordering the ship to stop. The captain refused and continued on, prompting the American to fire warning shots. Surely this was the moment the Cold War turned hot. But then the Soviet captain changed course and headed back to port. The crisis was averted. However, this close call revealed just how close the world was to nuclear annihilation. In 1983, the world would come just as close during a Soviet exercise gone wrong. Computer error and poor communication led a Soviet technician to believe that an American submarine had launched a nuclear strike against Russia. He reported it to his superiors, who ordered that the attack be reciprocated. Within minutes, Russian nuclear forces were on high alert. It would take hours before the errors were discovered, the arms race. Throughout the Cold War, the threat of mutually assured destruction kept the superpowers from engaging directly. Each side built up huge stockpiles of nuclear weapons. By the end of the 1980s, the USSR and USA had 25,000 warheads between them. But it wasn't just weapons of mass destruction that were in competition. Every field of science and technology became a battleground between two superpowers and their allies. The Soviet Union took the early lead in space, launching the first satellite, Vostok 1, and putting Yuri Gagarin into orbit as the first human in space. Shortly thereafter, the Americans would catch up and win the race to the moon. However, the Soviets would continue to impress, developing the first anti-ballistic missile system, the first space station, the first ever nuclear-powered spacecraft, and the first space shuttle. On the ground, the competition was no less fierce, with both sides racing to develop advanced aircraft, tanks, and other weapons. These competitions were expensive, often diverting resources from consumer goods and leading to shortages. Proxy wars. Perhaps the most controversial aspect of the Cold War was the numerous proxy wars fought around the world. In Southeast Asia, the communist government of North Vietnam was supported by the Soviets and China. In the 1950s and 60s, they fought against the US and its allies in South Vietnam. Over 50,000 American troops eventually became embroiled in a conflict they couldn't win, even with superior firepower. Public opposition to the war eventually forced President Nixon to pull out. Once he did, the Communist North took over the South in 1975. Meanwhile, another communist revolution was taking place 90 miles from the Florida coast. Fidel Castro had overthrown the dictator Batista in 1959. Initially, the US had supported Batista, but the CIA plotted to assassinate Castro with little success. In 1961, a group of Cuban exiles, trained by the CIA, attempted to invade Cuba. The Bay of Pigs invasion was a disaster and convinced Castro to align himself with the Soviets. For the next 2 decades, Cuba would be a thorn in the side of the United States. In 1979, the Cold War went to Afghanistan. Here, a communist government was in conflict with various local warlords. The Soviets intervened to prop up their communist allies, but soon found themselves bogged down in a conflict they couldn't win. Just as the US had done in Vietnam, the Soviets eventually pulled out, leaving the Afghanis to fight amongst themselves once more. Fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Cold War. By the 1980s, the Soviet economy was stagnating. While the Communist Party was able to build up its military to rival the US, it neglected consumer industries and scientific research. Mikhail Gorbachev was brought in to reform the system, introducing glasnost, meaning openness, and perestroika, meaning restructuring. In 1989, these reforms came to include greater freedom of expression and movement. As citizens exercised this newfound freedom, the Communist Party lost much of its power. In November of that year, the Berlin Wall, a potent symbol of communist oppression, was torn down. A year later, the Soviet Union was dissolved, its constituent republics declaring independence. Overnight, the Cold War was over. Legacy of the Cold War. Though the conflict never escalated into a direct war between nuclear powers, it had a profound effect on the world. Newly independent states littered the map, carved out by the departing superpowers. Whole regions of the world were devastated by proxy conflicts and countless lives were lost. The arms race diverted vast amounts of money from public services and the environment. Even today, the effects of the Cold War can be seen with NATO still existing and the shadow war between the US and China intensifying. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the thumbs up button below to help us out. Check out our other videos and leave a comment if you have a video suggestion. See you next time.